Hey yo, it's the Magichat, and I've recently made 2 boss rankings for 2 games where none of the bosses wound up making it to the highest possible tier. This has caused a bit of a backlash in my community, some saying I'm too nitpicky or harsh against anything other than FromSoft. But for a change of tone, in this one I'll be talking about my all-time favorites across all the games I've covered on this channel, and perhaps then you'll see why I don't hand out the amazing tier to just any good boss. Because the ceiling for what's truly top tier is pretty damn high. And to keep the list a little more varied than just FromSoft games, I'll only include 1 boss per game. That being said, I'm still a FromSoft fanboy, so keep that in mind. So let's get to ranking the bosses from best to best. I was debating for a while which of the Masterpiece 2D indie games bosses I should include here. It was obviously between Hollow Knight and Enchanted Portals. Okay, no, it's Cuphead. Had I gone with Cuphead, I'd probably have either picked Esther Winchester, the Moonshine Mob, or Chef Saltbaker to represent the game. But simply for the thrill that is unrivaled in Pure Vessel's fight in Hollow Knight, I gotta go with that. Sisters of Battle also deserves a nod for being an awesome synchronized trio gank, as does Nightmare King Grim for being one of the most memorable challenges I've overcome in a game. Nowadays he's not too bad, but for whatever reason I just can't nail Pure Vessel. No pun intended. He seems so simple at face value, but one slip up and you fall out of rhythm and you're history. But when you are in that rhythm, it's fun as fuck! I feel I spend most of the fight in mid-air, since you always have to be ready to jump out of harm's way, and there's so little time to react to any of his moves, so I often just preemptively jump up. Most other fights give you at least some moments of respite, but not Pure Vessel. Not only does your defensive game need to be on point, but you also need to keep an eye on your aggression, since he tends to punish recklessly attacking, by sometimes taking a stance in which he'll parry if you strike at him. That kind of shit I think is dope, and you'll see more of that throughout this video. So Pure Vessel is pure fun.
So, was this everything you hoped for?
Yes! To this day, Odin reigns supreme as the best spellcaster boss I've ever fought. No contest. If Judge Cleric counts as one, then she's probably second place. If not, then Kashin Koji, I guess. That definitely counts, and that's an unusually good one. But point is, mage bosses usually suck dick. Usually they're just too evasive and their spells are more annoying than fun to dodge. Odin, however, manages to be the right amount aggressive and evasive. Plus he can turn his staff into a spear as well as a whip, so he's not limited to just spells. But even all the spells he does use are really fun. Love the fact he uses crows, scrolls and spellbooks in the fight too, a neat detail that ties in with his lore. Now, this is a long ass fucking fight, but I don't ever feel its length. They knew just when to introduce a new element or mix up existing ones. Usually that mixing up is just him doing the same move but twice or 3 times in a row. But hey, it still kept surprising me, so it did its job. Also, the best moment in all of gaming is found here.
3 against 1, and don't forget me, old fucker! What did you call me?
As for the bosses of the other God of War games, well, I've only played the first, a little bit of the second, none of the third, which I hear is the best one, and I've done the 2018 one, which has Valkyrie Queen Sigrun. That one is definitely worth mentioning as another brilliant fight. But besides her, I don't think anyone else comes close to Odin. And all this praise comes despite the fact that I don't really even like God of War Ragnarok a whole lot. So believe me, I have no bias towards this game, and I still think Odin is fantastic and belongs here. Resident Evil 4 Remake made the best decision fucking ever by adding deflections into the game, and no other boss benefited more from its inclusion than Jack Krauser. That being said, the knife action is only a small part of the fight. There are 3 proper one-on-one duels with him, and each is separated by a trap-centric game of cat and mouse. You're the mouse. And I'm pretty sure I got caught by every single trap on my first playthrough. They're just really smartly placed, and I can't even feel mad for being outplayed. It was also deliciously tense just waiting for his next ambush. As for the 3 duels, each of them is way better than what should be possible in this game. Along with playing Sekiro with Krauser, he can jump off the arena to shoot at you, prompting you to have to take cover as well as throwing some unparryable moves at you every once in a while that you have to quick time dodge instead. And in his second fight it's like he's adapted to how you play, and now throws grenades if you take cover, and can teleport behind you for a sneak attack. His most interesting fight is the last one, where he's got mutated arms, one in the shape of a sword and the other a claw shield hybrid. There are some very subtle design choices that really elevate this boss for me. One is how when he starts covering behind the claw you have 2 options. A, you shoot at his legs and hope you stagger him. B, you get the fuck out of his face, because whenever he's turtling he can do an undodgeable, unparryable pimp slap. Then the claw can also be used for his scariest attack, the head grab. This one you can either outspace or duck under if you're in the right spot. There's just a lot of goodies in this one package. Fun, cheesy cutscenes and dialogue, tense Rambo hunting moments, deflection porn, positioning based challenge, and of course, the fun gunplay of Resident Evil 4 Remake. I know this is kind of a cop-out to have 3 bosses in one spot, but I feel it doesn't really matter which of the 3 I pick. Ludwig, Lady Maria, and Orphan of course are just stellar in different ways. Ludwig is by far the coolest, with one of the most memorable cutscenes ever put in a video game, on top of a great soundtrack, beautiful visuals, and a fun moveset. His moveset, however, pales in comparison to the breathtaking fight of Lady Maria. This fight set the gold standard for quick, agile humanoid bosses for the rest of From Software's games, and you see her influence all the way through to Elden Ring. But none of the bosses after her have boasted a soundtrack as hauntingly beautiful as hers. Not only is she fast, but her moveset puts more and more emphasis on directional dodges in each phase. The fire trails in phase 3 are just awesome because of that. Then there's Orphan of course, who remains as one of the most engaging, difficult fights in the series, and I've gone slowly from thinking it was okay, to thinking it was good, to thinking it's great, to now knowing it's absolute top tier. All in all, I feel the old Hunters is when FromSoft suddenly started making the best boss fights in the gaming industry, and they remain impressive even compared to most bosses made today. I kinda breezed over the Bloodborne fights, and I'll do the same here. Not because there's not much to say, but because I've said it all a million times before. What can I even add that hasn't been said about Gael? I guess one thing is how over time I've enjoyed it less and less and have continuously dropped him lower in my rankings. But about that, someone in the comments gave me some pretty fair criticism for my criticism, and that is, does it matter that Gael isn't as fun now after I've done the fight over 100 times? And I think that's a good point because it doesn't really. No boss is designed to be fought 100 times, and if it's enough to have made me want to fight it that many times, it speaks volumes of its quality already. In the end, Slave Knight Gael with his awesome visuals, well-animated moveset, that damn cloak, the crossbow and lightning in the final phase, and one of Yuki Kitamura's finest composed soundtracks, Gael will always remain as the peak of the Dark Souls trilogy. It won't even matter if I despise him a year from now, because for those several first years I couldn't get enough of the fight. So Gael's place in the Boss Hall of Fame is forever secured. Since I've restricted myself to one boss per game, I'll sadly have to admit Otakemaru, Shibata Katsuya, and DLC beefed up Shuden Doji. But know that I know that those fights are amazing. Not quite as amazing as Tate Eboshi though, the big booba herself. The dodges in Nioh are very narrow in iframes, with the exception of rolls that are only doable in high stance and optionally in mid stance. Often you don't have to worry about this however, because not too many bosses are aggressive or fast enough to force you to use the faster dodges of mid or low stance. Tate Eboshi does, but she also has certain moves that are nearly impossible to avoid with those quick dodges. So what this means is that you have to do stance swapping in the heat of combat. Prior to this boss I rarely felt like I had to utilize that, but ever since Tate Eboshi I've become a stance dancer, and I've used it ever since in pretty much every single fight, and it's been a hell of a lot more fun that way. And so it's partially thanks to this boss alone that I fell in love with the combat of Nioh 2. She not only encourages using it to its fullest, but also fits into it herself perfectly. She's very agile, has some of the most fun moves to counter in the entire game, rewards good positioning, punishes bad positioning, has long enough pauses to let you do your own cool combos, and has some neat mix-ups, like different jump attacks, a spin dance that varies in its length, and towards the end of the fight you have to be ready to dodge away from her whenever she does her sudden jump and slam attack. It's a potential delayed follow-up to a lot of her moves. And that delay is enough to let you punish the initial attack, but will fuck you up if you go all out. It keeps you on your toes, but doesn't force you to become a passive. So I think that's great. This is one of those addicting fights I can't help but keep coming back to long after I've beaten her. Some people don't see Loux quite as favorably as I do, and I kinda get that. I would love it if he had a proper final phase where he just goes insane and there's fire everywhere, but I don't mind that it's a more honest, simple one-on-one duel that evokes kind of the same feeling I get from, say, Knight Artorias. Not every boss needs to go crazy with particle effects and epic choir to be memorable. That being said, I do like his soundtrack and his moves are cool, just not as over the top as you might expect from Team Ninja. What makes Loux their finest boss for me though is his combo mix-up game. It's one of the most insanely flexible movesets I've ever seen. Every single attack that he starts can end with a different finisher, even his bow attacks, even his GTFO move if you're behind him. This means he will always have that element of unpredictability even once you've learned every single one of his moves. His horseback moveset is far less interesting, but thankfully it's always very brief and is more of an intermission phase between the real battles. And while he doesn't go bonkers at the end, he does gain more moves throughout, including one of my favorite moves in any game ever. I cannot put it to words how satisfying his spin combo is to deflect, and I love that it's incorporated into his existing moves. I've never been less annoyed fighting a boss for 4 hours, from evening to morning, than I have when I fought Loux for the first time. I wasn't a huge fan of Long, especially after how great Nioh 2 was. But I'm not even lying, Loux alone made this game worth it for me. All the previous bosses are in a sort of random order, but the top 3 is the legit top 3 in ascending order. These fights make my dick expand. That being said, besides Godfrey, I think Morgoth and Malenia deserve a mention here as well. Morgoth probably has my favorite moveset in the entire Soulsborne series. It's just too bad he has no health. Malenia is also one of the most densely designed bosses. I just wish my first experience with her hadn't been so frustrating. Godfrey does not share these shortcomings. He was such an intimidating, adrenaline-inducing chat of a boss that made me feel like I was playing God of War more than Ragnarok ever did. The first half is at first glance not that insane, but he has the smoothest combo extensions ever put in a video game. Like, if you get too far away from him during his base attacks, he can smoothly transition into a thrust, and then back into the regular combo. Every move just flows into one another. As much as I love Loux, I don't like how clearly and abruptly his animations end and he has to pause before starting another. Godfrey already displays some superhuman strength in Phase 1, but that goes off the charts once he removes his ghostly lion that restrains him. Now he can leap all over the place, shatter the ground, create shockwaves by just walking, and rip you apart with his bare hands. And if you thought Loux' mix-up game was strong, Godfrey, or rather Hoarah, has him beat. At least with Loux, I know what potential follow-ups he might have and can prepare for it. With Hoarah, I never know what he's gonna do next. Pretty much any move can be a follow-up to any other move. There are some rules you can learn in order to be able to safely land a hit on him, like some of his attacks having long recovery animations or being exclusively used as combo finishers. While you can greatly simplify him by just sticking to his ass as much as possible, I don't feel tempted to do that because I just love watching his animations. It's also appreciated you aren't limited to just roll dodging. Jumping over his shockwaves is not only viable, but often more advantageous. So I'm curious to see if Shadow of the Erdtree DLC can top Godfrey. If that's the case, you could check back on this video once the DLC is out. You might find a pinned comment from me confirming it. That's right, boys, Inner Father is not number 1 this time around. He used to be, and for good reason. This is a modified version of a super version of Great Shinobi Owl. What was good about the original fight was improved drastically by the Father version in Hoarah Estate, and that version was perfected by a later update to Sekiro that brought us boss rush gauntlets. And speaking of which, Inner Isshin and Genichiro should be mentioned here as well. Both are fantastic. Isshin, even the original version of him, is definitely top 10 best bosses of all time material. But Inner Father is somehow even better. This is another boss that punishes reckless aggression by sometimes doing a Mist-Raven dodge when struck at his neutral. It doesn't mean you aren't allowed to hit him at his neutral, you just need to make sure you're not R1 spamming and only deflecting once the boss has deflected one of your attacks, which is how many of the other Sekiro fights tend to go. Phase 2, of course, I've praised the ever-living shit out of, but if you'll excuse me, I'll have to do it again. The mechanic of him moving around the arena with a Spirit Owl, then ambushing you with a number of different delayed attacks, and having a follow-up attack that leaves him vulnerable for a great punish if you deflect that ambush, is to this day one of the best attack patterns ever designed as far as I'm concerned. The regular Father boss did have this as well, but what he didn't have was the Mist-Raven triple ambush combo, which is fucking sick as well. Not only does he have a good number of new moves that boost the quality of the fight, but his movement in general is a lot more sporadic and hard to read. So what could possibly diminish the awesomeness of Inner Father? Well, I would have to say it's inaccessibility. Again, this was added in a super late update and you need to go out of your way to unlock this version of Owl. In fact, you need to beat the game twice on the same save file, which is fucking stupid. As a result, most people that beat Sekiro probably haven't beaten or even seen this boss, and story-wise it's not impactful at all because it's just a refight for the sake of a refight. There's no story context for the inner version. You're not gonna have any emotion while fighting this boss, other than, you know, enjoyment because it's so much fun. And the arena itself is pretty shit for such an agile boss. So presentation isn't great, even though everything else is 11 out of 10. Okay, first I gotta mention a few other great hits from Armored Core 6. Air is a great fight, and without her, I don't know if Allmind would exist, so that alone makes me love her. The Ibis series mech is insanely good as well. And I would like to correct a mistake in my original boss ranking. Beltaeus should be in amazing tier as well. Those missile salvos are a thing of beauty. I've grown to appreciate them more and more over time. Just the most fun things to avoid in the entire game. All three are potential top 10 worthy fights for me, but Allmind is number 1. Even though some of the complaints I had for Inner Father you could try to argue are present here as well. You also need several replays in order to unlock this, and like Father he has a reused boss arena and is also a reskin of another boss, but it's done in a way more organic way in Armored Core 6. This is still part of the main story experience. You haven't really beaten Armored Core 6 until you've gotten all 3 endings, and New Game Plus is different enough to justify multiple replays. And story-wise, there's a lot going on here. Not only is this the culmination of the secret plot of Allmind, as well as your journey with Air and the Coral, but it's also a showdown with great, unexpected villains, backed by themes woven throughout the entire game. I summarized it briefly in my AC6 boss ranking, but there's a more detailed explanation by Fat Brett, which sums up my thoughts perfectly, and I recommend watching it. But let's talk about the fight itself. I used to really dislike the gang squad at the start, and especially how Iguazu would just hide behind the shield the entire fight while fleeing from you. But one thing that's brilliant, especially if it was intended, is that the weapon you get for finding all the combat logs, the Coral Oscillator, is the single best weapon to use here. It completely eradicates all his minions in one fell swoop. It's extremely satisfying and a nice reward if you manage to get to the ending with all the combat logs. It's still perfectly doable without though, but shit gets real when Allmind's Super AC arrives. From here on out, the fight is absolutely perfect. Now she's deployed 2 sea spiders that do synced attacks with Iguazu. In any other game than AC6, this would suck. But the fact you hear the alarm sound and an arrow indicating where the sea spiders are attacking from makes it so you don't even need to see all 3 targets on screen at the same time to be able to dodge them. What I love the most about this phase though is just the feel of it. In Air's boss fight you have a space battle in the background. In Allmind's fight, you are the space battle, and Air is actually a great help here. She uses different color lasers that you can easily separate from the blue and purple attacks of enemies, and can actually deal some significant damage, stun the sea spiders, and most helpfully deploy a coral shield on the ground which you can use strategically. While the Allmind AC is a remix of Air, I love the mid-air tango with it, and it differs greatly from how you should approach it. The melee strikes are fun to dodge by just flying through them, and they're more often combos rather than singular hits like they were in Air's fight. And I like baiting out the third strike since it's a nice damage window, on top of looking dope. I even really like the rapid lasers, just feels so good when you see 100 laser needles go right by you. This is an S tier phase, followed up by, well, the best thing ever designed. Iguazu finally breaks free of Allmind's control and becomes a singular will. And all he wants is to destroy you personally, just out of jealousy because you're the main character. Instead of laser swords, he now has these badass claws that can be extended into becoming giant laser tridents. They look amazing, it's like Moonlight Greatsword in the form of claws. It's not all just eye candy though, there is so much depth here. Literally, because unlike in the other games in this video, you have an entire vertical 3D space to take into account, not just ground dodging. There's never one right solution for how to avoid an attack. It always depends on where you are and where Iguazu is in relation to yourself. Sometimes it's better to fly under him, sometimes over him, sometimes it's better to dodge backwards, sometimes it's better to dodge through him, and sometimes to either left or to right. You have to consider his super precise tracking too. The way it works is that since you can't iframe through attacks in this game, you have to quick dodge at a precise time and angle to lose that tracking, or to sort of mislead it. You can do this by dodging in the opposite direction of where you were originally moving when he started tracking you, or sometimes by just staying still until the last second. But to ensure you're not just standing still until Iguazu comes at you, he fills the gaps with his rapid laser needles. So it's always a constant dance. Compared to most others on this list, this boss, or at least this phase, has relatively few attacks. Yet the way they are designed makes each of them worth 100. And making a positioning and movement based boss in a game with by far the best movement mechanics is sure to be a hit. A truly excellent final boss is supposed to put everything you've learned to the test, and this does that. It tests how well you've learned to handle weaker squads of machines, enemies with shields, aerial combat with a fast opponent with projectiles flying all over the place, quick burst dodges, and of course, positioning and spatial awareness. Not to mention it's perfectly viable with all sorts of builds. This boss is a masterpiece, and this entire video was honestly just an excuse for me to gush about it. So that's it for this video. I'm sure many will disagree, but I just wanted my thoughts to be out there and to show how great Allmind can be once you learn how the fight works. Do let me know what you think and what your favorite bosses are, and I'll be happy to read through it all. Thanks for watching, see ya!